Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today to our session, Promoting STEAM Innovation and Invention in the Classroom. I'm Philippa Rappaport. I'm the Head of Education and Engagement at the Smithsonian Office of Educational Technology, which is a central education office at the Smithsonian. And I'm joined today by Nyssa Buning, who's the head of Invention Education at the National Museum of American History's Spark Lab, and also Carol O'Donnell, who's the director, and Hannah Osborn, who's a project manager, both from the Smithsonian Science Education Center. And then behind the scenes, we have Rhett Ransom, also from the Office of Educational Technology, and he's providing IT support behind the scenes. So in our session today, we'll explore strategies for cultivating an inventive mindset in your students. We'll talk about the history of STEAM innovation in America and try an open-ended invention challenge that uses object-based learning techniques to encourage creative problem solving and also to support curiosity and perseverance, skills that are essential to inventors throughout history. You'll leave today with a set of facilitation tools to support students as they develop their own inventive identity and become future problem solvers. And you'll also receive access to a newly released ebook from the Smithsonian Science Education Center, and that ebook is called Stories of Women in STEAM Innovation, Celebrating America's 250th. So we're really pleased to be able to present this program today and to support colleagues across the Smithsonian who are doing really exciting work in STEAM education. And for anyone who doesn't know, STEAM is putting the A for arts into STEM. So as we get started, I see some of you are already introducing yourselves. It's great to see you here. And please continue to introduce yourselves if you'd like. A few logistics as we get started. If you need live captions, you can click the Show Captions button. We always like these sessions to be as interactive as possible, so please use the chat liberally. You can also use the Q&A button. We are checking that, although during the session itself, we'll be working off of the chat function, but we'll be sure to get to your questions if we've missed any during the actual presentation part. Okay, today's session is part of a series. It's actually the 9th of 10 episodes in a series celebrating America's 250th. And so I'll put this link that you see on the slide also in the chat. But this program is really meant to celebrate the big stories and the little stories as America reaches its 250th milestone anniversary. And the series is focusing on how to teach the 250 in your classroom. So that eventually we hope that through these programs and through, of course, your teaching is that students, you'll leave with a collection of techniques and ideas to help students think critically and recognize their own value and appreciate others' perspectives and ultimately gain confidence to be engaged learners. So you can find everything on this page. Registration for the next session or else information about the archived session. And you can also find access to Learning Lab collections. So we create a Learning Lab collection to accompany each episode. And this is the one for today's session. And I'll also put that link in the chat shortly. So I'll turn it over to Nyssa in just a sec. But just a reminder that this session is being recorded. And for those of us who have come to these programs before, you know that we like to start out with a question. So today's question is actually 3 questions in one. And the questions are, who is your favorite inventor? What is your favorite invention? And why? So I'll turn it over to Nyssa, and that's it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Philippa. I really appreciate it, and I am excited to be here today and to think about how we can bring the idea of STEM and STEAM challenges into the classroom in a way that fosters invention, innovation, and the connection of students to their own inventive identity and capacity for creative problem solving. So I see some introductions in the chat coming in as you all think about who your favorite inventor is and what your favorite invention is. Um, Georgiana says some of Benjamin Franklin's inventions, including the library. And one of the things I want to start out with talking about, and we'll go ahead and head to the next slide, is the role of invention through inventive identity as well as the objects around us. So we'll start off talking about this interplay between an exploration that our students do in inventive identity and the way that connects with history and objects from our past and our present. So on the next slide, we'll go ahead and think of an object. Spark Lab is the flagship educational program of the Lemelson Center for the Study of Invention and Innovation, and that is based out of the National Museum of American History. So we study the role of creativity and innovation within the stories of American history. So I would love if you all could think about an object. It might be the shoes on your feet, the kitchen appliance you need to wash when you get home. It might be something that has a place in what you think of as history, whether that's through our government, whether that's through our music, our movies, our agriculture and industry. And go ahead and put that object that you're thinking about into the chat. As you do that, think about the questions on the screen. What do you know about the events, places, and people that relate to that object? Things that are factual and tell the story behind that object. The second question, I see some great responses coming in. Scissors, cell phone, water bottle. Wonderful. So after you think about related how you relate to that object through events, places, and people, how does that object influence the way you see the world differently? And finally, how do you see yourself differently because of that object? Is this something that is part of your identity? I see in here bicycle or sewing machine. Those are things that maybe are really important to you. Do you identify as a bicyclist? Is that something you do as a hobby? Is that something you do um, as an important part of the way you spend your free time? On the next slide, the way we base our work in invention education and inventive identity and thinking about objects relates to two different frameworks that can be applied in the classroom for inventive identity exploration. The first one is the Vines framework. You'll see here with the long rectangle. And the Vines framework considers how objects are contextualized in relation to the self. So think back to your object. Where along this spectrum would you say that you relate to it? Do you see it its through the lens of yourself or through the lens of its place, whether that's in the 250th and American history, or whether that's in a broader sense of history or a smaller sense of history? It might be your family history. And how can you use this framework in the classroom to inspire your students to think about the ways that, whether it's museum objects or things that they may be learning about in other classes, influence their view of themselves and their own identity? The second framework we work with when we consider role identity exploration and inventive identity in invention challenges is the dynamic systems model of role identity. This highlights that learners in museums or classrooms approach their own identity exploration with these sets of overlapping factors that influence what actions they take in a given situation. Their worldview, the way they see themselves, what actions they think are possible, and their purpose and goals all contribute towards the way they engage in an experience that allows them to explore or shift their own identity. As we go through the next set of slides, I would love if you think about the ways that you can design a cultural activity system that prompts your students to consider what their action possibilities are, how they bring in their worldview and their self-perceptions into the actions that they're going to take as they work through some creative problem solving in order to see themselves as inventors. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about specifically inventive identity. When we at the Lemelson Center and Spark Lab think about inventive identity, we define it as a person's network of inventive related beliefs, goals, self-perceptions, emotions, and possible actions oriented towards creative solutions for complex problems. This moves away from a definition of inventions as something technological, the light bulb or the cell phone only. It moves away from inventions being based in a patent system. We know throughout history in America, not everyone had access to the patent system all the time throughout our history. And not everything was patented. A lot of the ways that people creatively solved problems in their own lives or in their communities didn't get a patent. And so we really want to think about inventive identity through this lens of creative problem solving in a way that affects our students' own lives, their communities, or their world. On the next slide, we're going to move into thinking about a set of objects and how we use objects at the National Museum of American History to inspire our invention challenges that we invite our visitors to participate in. So as you look at this object on the screen, it has no context, it has no label. Consider what physical properties the object has. It might be what materials it's made of, it might be the shapes, it might be the way it's photographed, how that influences how big you think it is. And go ahead and put in the chat what you notice and what conclusions you might draw from that. As you think about what you notice and those conclusions, and I pull up the chat, think about how you know these things. Is it from school? Is it from a book or a museum visit? Is it from your own personal experience? I see some folks saying old school glasses to view a solar eclipse, a lot of connections to eyewear and the slits in it. So maybe some eye protection or some sunglasses from the Inuit cultures. The connections to the rope behind it. On the next slide, we're going to move on to our next object in our series of objects and consider the same thing. What do you notice about this and what conclusions you might draw? Have you used something like this recently? Is it a personal connection? And finally, on the last slide, we've got our third object. And as we've gone through this series, you can continue to consider what materials it's made of and how you know what you know about it. But as you think about this one, I want you to think back to the previous three. If you think about all three of these objects, can you identify a common problem that they all solve? If you phrased it as all three of these are ways to blank, what would tie them together? Go ahead and put that in the chat. Oh, I see some answers coming in. Weather protection, protecting ourselves from the sun. Excellent. So this is the way we frame our challenges in Spark Lab, and you'll see on the next slide what we consider. We'll draw examples from our collections in the National Museum of American History to think about throughout our history, what are ways people have solved problems in the past? Problems like sun protection, whether it be our eyes or our skin or our whole bodies in the case of the umbrella. But also, which of these objects inspire you to learn more about the story? Which of these objects make you reflect on your views of the world, and which influence the way you think about yourself? And as you think about how these can be applied in the classroom, maybe with what students are learning in your classes or other classes, how can you include these examples that help them to draw those connections, both to our history, to other classes that they're in, but also to their own personal lived experiences, and make those connections between inventions and everyday objects around them? All right. So now that we've talked about the way we use objects to inspire our invention challenges, on the next slide, we'll start to talk about how we design our invention challenges to invite students to move along this continuum and think about how they reflect on their own inventive identity and inventive thinking. So on the next slide, we'll dive into this designing to foster inventive identity. And on the next slide, you'll see examples of invention challenges in Spark Lab. You'll see here there are a couple common elements to all four of these activities that we use when we design in Spark Lab. So you'll see here on the screen, we have create clothing for exploration, design a voting poster, design a video game controller, and invent an alarm system. And for all of these activities, we have these titles. They're really simple. They're really easy to get started with. And then those purple tiles that you absolutely cannot read provide some questions that allow our visitors to start engaging in the activity on their own, to think about what elements of a voting poster have inspired people in the past to get out and vote. How do these connect to our history and our collections at the National Museum of American History? And then you'll see each activity has a set of materials available for our visitors to work with. And this is one of the key elements of a Spark Lab activity is a defined set of materials, a defined challenge, and materials that combine familiar and unfamiliar materials. One of the things we do in Spark Lab is that all of our activities are a prototype. We introduce them to visitors without a lot of extensive testing because we want to live our inventive mission at the same time as we ask our visitors to. And one of the things we found is a way to invite folks into invention, which may be a topic that not everybody's comfortable with, is to have something that feels comfortable. The video game controller uses a really common building system, commercially available, combined with custom built 3D printed and otherwise machined parts, as well as the video game interface, in order to allow students to say, oh, I have this set at home. I know how to use these. I'm going to investigate a little bit further how I can use these in this setting. On the next slide, are some more elements of what our goals are in Spark Lab. So when we design an invention activity, we always want limited instruction to get started. And the reason we do this is to allow our visitors to take ownership of their own experience. When we invite visitors to the museum or students into an invention experience, we work really hard to develop that sense of authority in them. They have control over their own ways that they're going to creatively solve the problem in front of them. And that means that we have to allow them to explore the materials on their own and really decide what they want to do without looking to a facilitator in Spark Lab or a teacher to introduce the concept or provide some of the basics that they need to know. They don't need to know anything besides their curiosity. Um, and finally, the other thing I want to mention is that our Spark Lab invention activities are open-ended. When we test our new activities, we aim to see more than one successful outcome for each activity. We want to see in something like help clean up the ocean. What would you invent to clean plastic out of the ocean? That our visitors are thinking about all of the things that they might have seen or studied in school that help clean plastic out of the ocean and the multiple ways that they might do that in their communities or around the world. And then they're applying that to different inventions of their own each time. On the next slide, um, I want you to think back to that object you thought about in the very beginning. Your bicycle, your water bottle sitting on your desk right next to you, your cell phone. Does that inspire you to create an invention challenge? How can you say, instead of invent a bicycle or redesign the bicycle, um, can you invent a way to get from one place to another? Or invent a way to get from your home to your friend's house? What other object would inspire you? This might be a piece of history that you connect to really strongly, or something in your own personal life that's a part of your identity or some of your students' identities. So, moving on from designing challenges to foster inventive identity, I want to talk about how we facilitate for inventive identity. This is where we come in as supporters of the inventive identity exploration process and working through an inventive challenge. So, on the next slide, this inventive thinking may inspire research and content learning, but our goal is that in invention challenge, students drive the experiences. So to go back to that, what would you invent to help clean plastic out of the ocean? Or how would you design a voting poster? Allowing your students to decide what they want to bring in, whether it's something, again, that they learned in another class or something that they've seen in their lives, and move across the spectrum you see from expert-centered to student-driven, but starting from that student-driven end of things and allowing then your students to find out where they can find the answers if they need to know how circuits work to complete their invention or how other people have solved this problem in the past. On the next slide, the way we define success in Spark Lab is not that we're teaching how circuits work or how the best ways you can build a strong bridge, but how we foster these inventive traits. And we know that these relate to the way inventors work through the study we've done of inventors in the past throughout history and our oral history interviews with current inventors, that curiosity, empathy, creativity, resilience are such strong parts of the ways that inventors work and those muscles that inventors really need to flex. So when you think about designing an activity for your classroom, how do you design something that your students feel like they can take risks, that it's a comfortable environment in front of their peers. It can be scary to try something that you don't know is going to work. How do you design an activity to cultivate empathy? For us, a lot of times, one of my favorite ways to do it is to invent for a pet. I see a lot of our students and visitors really resonate with thinking about the needs, whether it's of their pet or a pet that they'd really like to have, and what kind of habitat it might want to live in, or what kind of food it might want, and how they could feed their pet the ideal food. But as we think about your role as a facilitator in your students' invention challenges, your role as a facilitator is really important in some of these things like tolerance of ambiguity. There's no right answers in these challenges. It's not, you're not going to get an A if you get the light to come on in a snap circuit set. Um, but you're going to have to design a way to electrify a room in your house. And that can include a fan, it can include an alarm to get you up for school, or it may not. Resilience as well is one of these parts we see when we design activities. They're designed to be frustrating, just like inventors have to work through frustration. We've got so many great examples of inventors who have had to work through a lot of frustration. And in a lot of history, we know the inventors who had to work through frustration for a successful activity or a successful invention. We don't always know the ones who got really frustrated, had to practice a lot of resilience, and never got their invention to market. We don't tell those stories as often. So think about as you design activities how you can foster each of these 8 inventive traits. On the next slide, we have developed in SparkLab a toolkit to really highlight the different ways that we facilitate for inventive identity exploration. And what this toolkit has 10 tools, and it's designed to really highlight the breadth of what facilitation can be to meet the needs of the student, but also to acknowledge the different ways different people might facilitate. That it's more than just ask them questions. There's no right or wrong answers. Explore the materials, but that there are a lot of ways that we create a cultural activity system in which our students really feel like they can explore their inventive identity and their creative problem solving skills. So to get your students started, the way you welcome students into an experience is so critical. In SparkLab, a lot of times we'll say, "Hi, welcome to SparkLab. This is where you get to be an inventor." And immediately, as you come from another part of the museum, that sets the expectation that you're taking an active role and that you're embodying the idea of who an inventor is. And it might look different to different people. The second tool we use to get started is allowing our visitors to explore while we observe them. That we we want to invite those visitors in to see which invention activity they might connect with first, what feels comfortable to them, how they can explore the materials and maybe discuss whether it's a school field trip or a family with each other how they want to solve the problem. The next set of tools is really during the invention experience. On the next slide. Great. During the invention experience, the ways we really dig into allow students to solve problems creatively, push past frustration, and start to take on those qualities of the inventive identity. So the first one is confer, using the language of invention, labeling behaviors that students are displaying, using invention vocabulary words. Prototype is one that we use a lot. A prototype is something that can show other people how your invention works, even though your prototype may not be a working model. Can you tell me about your prototype? We all know this from so many different areas of teaching, but really thinking about what specific language you want to use in invention to foster that. The second one is reinforcing. the idea of the invention process over a finished product. We know how much we all want to get to a finished product. That's just societally really true wherever you are. And in SparkLab, it can be really difficult to sort of think about the ways that you encourage the hard work that went into the process, the creating, trying your invention, then realizing what went wrong and tweaking it a little bit. So, talking through with your students what they might change, how they know what they might change, and then giving them the encouragement on the next tool to try again and continue to work through their invention challenges. And finally, the last tool is collaborating. And this is true for us in Spark Lab. I'm sure it's true for your students. Thinking about how you can encourage students to work together towards their goal, whether you want this to be an activity that they can do on their own. And so there's each student has a different set of materials, or we have one set of materials, it's large scale, and that's a chance to practice those collaboration and communication skills. But as well, how can you collaborate with them? How can you co-invent alongside them, especially when there's no right answer? It means that you don't have the answer. And so sitting down and working on the invention with them, uh, inviting yourself to be their invention assistant and taking on a role yourself, giving yourself the label of supporting their invention uh, fabrication can be really powerful. And finally, the last four tools are ways that you can extend the experience beyond the challenge itself. So, thinking about how you scaffold activities in classrooms that might not be as much for different age groups than we see at the museum, but how can you scaffold them to connect to other classes that your students may be taking, other subjects that they may be learning about? How can you scaffold them to really uh, make sure that everyone feels invited into the process of invention? Some people love some robotics and Legos, and some people love, for us, it's design a costume. A lot of times we'll have design a costume and an activity using electricity in our front window, and those two invite people in different ways and signal to them that this is a place for them to be inventors. So thinking about what that looks like in your classroom is really important. And going along with that, how do you enhance the experience so that your students feel comfortable taking a risk? For us, this looks like making an activity intentionally silly. We have activity about designing safety equipment for a sport. And our tools, you may be designing safety equipment for skateboarding, and you have some bubble wrap, and you have a knight's helmet, and you have a frying pan, and you have all of these really silly things so that you don't get wrapped up in thinking about, I don't know how to make this material or what goes into a helmet. Is a bike helmet better than a horseback riding helmet? You've got a knight's helmet. Do you want that or not? This can be going back to combining familiar building sets with unfamiliar materials or setting a time limit for rapid prototyping. We all probably resonate with this idea of wanting to spend a long time on something to make sure it looks really good and it works just the way you want it to. But making sure students go through quickly sort of frees you from that idea of it has to be perfect and moves you back into it has to get the point across. The last two, how do you invite students to pitch their invention? What structure allows students to wrap that experience up in a way that communicates their ideas, whether it's to you or it involves making a video or a commercial or a pitch session, a lot of times like inventors do. And then how do you prompt real world thinking beyond the invention activity itself? What skills did your students use and how would they apply them to other areas of their life? They did creative problem solving for inventing safety equipment for skateboarding, but how does that apply to making sure a screen door at home doesn't slam and wake up their baby sister. And this idea of the invention process, pushing past frustration, is really important to think about how those skills apply to other areas of their life. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Hannah, who's going to tell you a little bit more about ways you can take this further.
Thank you, Nyssa. So at the Smithsonian Science Education Center, we focus on inquiry-based learning, and much like this presentation, we ask a lot of questions. Nyssa's already discussed some strategies for engaging inventive identity in youth. So let's kind of build upon that and ask what are some other ways we can engage young people and their inventive identity, and really what does that look like in a science classroom or a history classroom or an art classroom? And the answer really depends on what questions we're asking and what question you choose. So I'm going to focus on 2 questions and then talk about 2 free educational resources that you can download from a website or Learning Lab that kind of build on the Spark Labs activity and engaging the inventive identity. And the first question I have is, do I view myself as an inventor? And the second is, what do I notice and care about? Next slide, please. So that first question, do I view myself as an inventor, really is digging into identity and belonging and what we call see-do theory. And that is based on if a young person sees something about themselves represented in a mentor, a teacher, an adult of any kind in a field of study, that they believe they can do that job or be in that field. And this really fits nicely into Nyssa's toolkit for extending experiences of inventive identity, because it can really scaffold nicely into any class subject. It's not science dependent or art dependent. It really flows throughout learning. And next slide. And the resource I wanted to highlight for this question of do I see myself as an inventor is our newest ebook titled Stories of Women in STEAM Innovation, Celebrating America's 250th. And this really came out of the celebration of American identity, but also kind of what are those stories of women in STEAM that don't get told as often or maybe aren't highlighted as frequently. This is the 10th book in our Stories of Women in STEM series. The other ones focus on very specific, like biotechnology or space, very specific careers, while this one really focuses on the breadth of the American experience across STEAM. It has American women with 21 biographies across science, technology, engineering, art, and math, including an introduction by the director of the Museum Conservation Institute at Smithsonian, and her story of kind of bridging science and art and technology, and really why we want to preserve history in this way. And it also contains a timeline of 113 women across American history with images and very short blurbs about their experience. Next slide, please. So in addition to the biographies, there are a total of 105 Smithsonian artifacts, tools, works of art, notebooks, patents, photographs, all sorts of things throughout the book. So if you wanted to do the Spark Lab identity activity, you could choose a photo from the Smithsonian without having to visit it. So you can kind of take the Smithsonian home to your classroom, show students maybe some museum objects they haven't seen or don't have like a visual identity of. And additionally, you could select an object that is specific to the subject you're teaching or a time period that you're teaching. So you can kind of focus whatever your classroom is doing in the book itself. And here are a few examples. So we have the Apollo 11 capsule on display at the National Air and Space Museum, a woven picture of Betsy Ross sewing the first American flag from the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum in New York, a collected plant sample from the National Museum of Natural History, and a Georgia O'Keeffe stamp from the National Postal Museum. So it's really a way to bring Spark Lab and Smithsonian into a classroom in all different fields. Next slide, please. So once you have done the inventive identity map or whatever kind of exploration of object that you're doing in your classroom, you can then extend the experience even further. And you can do this in a couple of ways. So if you selected the Apollo 11 capsule, for example, there's a biography of Margaret Hamilton, who is a mathematician and a software engineer that built the software, and you can kind of see her standing with all her piles of code to get Apollo 11 to the moon and back. If you wanted to focus on a time period, you could do that as well. So say you selected the Georgia O'Keeffe stamp. This is a page from the timeline in the book that has the Georgia O'Keeffe stamp on it. So you can kind of look at the other innovations that were happening at the same time she was painting. And finally, you could extend your inventor identity experience by looking at the strands of STEAM. In the book, we have highlighted each of the strands with a color coding. So you see Margaret Hamilton has that red bar. And then on the timeline, there are also red bars for different people. So that's identifying math as a strand. If you wanted to look at art, you would look at pink and so on. And that's explained in the book itself. Next slide, please. And finally, with the book, you can come back to the question of identity and do I view myself as an inventor by having students create identity maps, identifying any characteristics that they share with people in the book or what they see similar about themselves and people in the book, and really connect to those stories a little further. Next slide. So then we look at the second question, what do I notice and care about? And this question is really getting into the idea of a local and global problem. And for that, I've highlighted our innovation guide. As you see it there, this is the newest guide in our Smithsonian Science for Global Goals. And it is freely available. It's a community research guide. So it takes students, you can kind of mixed age group, you do it as a team, as a research team. And go through tasks and activities of this discover, understand, and act. So they take their ideas and their previous knowledge and apply them to complex global issues, this one being climate change. In this guide, they follow a complete innovation process from identifying a problem all the way to launching an innovation. It explores causes, impacts of changing climate using a lens of innovation to kind of help identify solutions. And they're using their own creativity and community knowledge with hands-on experiences, with low-cost resources, and also data-driven investigations to become innovators. Next slide, please. And so here you see kind of the layout of how the innovation process with icons that they follow through the guide. And it treats problems, even really large ones and that are overwhelming, like climate change, that don't feel fixable. It takes a very optimistic turn on those and gives them the scaffolding to work through problems. Not everyone in your class is going to be a scientist or an engineer or want to be an innovator in this way. But everyone needs to have that ability to kind of think of big problems and come up with solutions. This again ties really nicely with what Nyssa was talking about earlier, where she was extending the experience. It's student-led, it's not didactic, it's not teaching to a class, it's really letting the students lead. And we're getting to no right answer. There's no grade at the end. It is, what can we come up with to make a better world? And next slide, please. Another highlight of this that gets back to our see-do theory is the innovation guide has research mentors in each task. So you're learning from scientists and experts in the field who have provided their identity map, so you can make that connection to this scientist or expert, and also gets into the students being able to identify themselves in these people, but also realizing that these people are just like them. They're not a completely separate existence because they are experts. They are just maybe a little further in their career path. And next slide, please. So here's an example of a student's innovator identity map. This is a task, or this is an activity from the first task in the guide. So the student has filled out their identity map, what things they feel are important to them personally, and then they go through and they label parts of their identity with corresponding symbols that are lining up with innovator characteristics. So it's featured in the first task. They kind of build on this, and they're going through the rest of the guide with this idea of knowing that they are already innovative and they are already building, and they're building upon that in future activities. And it really helps students have an early win by knowing what they're bringing to the table for this big, complex issue. Next slide. And then finally, the innovation guide, as with other guides in the Smithsonian Science for Global Goals series, has what we call at the Smithsonian callouts. These are green boxes throughout the guide that highlight Smithsonian spaces, programs, projects, and bringing the Smithsonian into your classroom or educational space for those who can't visit, or if you're able to visit, there's a lot of museums, you can't visit them all. So it's allowing you to have a robust experience while visiting Spark Lab, but also bringing Spark Lab into your classroom. And next slide. So this is the time to get out your phones. Both the Innovation Guide and the Stories of Women in STEAM Innovation Celebrating America's 250th are available through the Learning Lab that Philippa has shared, but we're also offering printed versions of the ebook itself. We can mail it to you for free, so if you want to scan this QR code and fill out the form with your address and email, we'll get that in the mail to you. And I will also put the link in the chat. Well, the link didn't work. I'll put it in the chat in just a moment. And with that, I will pass it back to Nyssa, or I'm sorry, Philippa.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you. I just love all the scaffolding you've given everyone and all the resources they can use. So I'm just giving you a minute here to make sure you've gotten your phone out and got the QR code, but Hannah will also put the link. And then while you have your phone out, we'd love for you to provide feedback about today's program. So here's another QR code for you, and I'll also put that link in the chat. And so I'm going to stop sharing in just a little bit. But while we'd love to open up for Q&A now, discussion, and while you're putting your questions and comments in the chat, I'd like to just ask Carol O'Donnell to talk for a minute or two about a new special program called the STEAM Schools of Distinction.
Thanks so much, Philippa, and thank you, a huge thank you to Nyssa and to Hannah for the amazing resources that they've shared with all of us. So I'm at the Smithsonian Institution. I direct the Smithsonian Science Education Center, but I also co-lead what's called the Smithsonian STEAM Initiative, STEAM Education Initiative. And we are trying to make certain that we can provide support to as many schools across the country to ensure that teachers have the resources they need to promote science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. So one of our launch signature programs this year is going to be called the Smithsonian STEAM Schools of Distinction. And the Smithsonian STEAM Schools of Distinction is a first of its kind Smithsonian program designed to specifically identify, support, and recognize, for those of you who teach middle school or high school, we will be recognizing middle schools and high schools that are taking a whole school systemic approach to integrating science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics education for a more innovative, as you heard today, inclusive, and sustainable future, one that creates a community where administrators, teachers, and students can thrive. We are going to be, if you go to that link, schools can now apply to attend a Smithsonian STEAM Schools of Distinction event that we're hosting this summer, July 13th through 17th, 2026, right here in Washington, D.C., to celebrate the nation's 250th birthday. And part of that week-long event will be helping schools get to know all of the amazing resources that exist across the Smithsonian, including not only the Spark Lab that Nyssa just shared with us at the National Museum of American History, but also many of the objects and stories that Hannah shared that are found in that STEAM, that 250 years of celebrating women's contributions to STEAM innovation. You will also, if your school is selected to come to Washington, D.C., we will pay for your travel here, your time in Washington, D.C., your hotel, food, of course. And we will also provide to the schools a free classroom set or library set of the books that Hannah just talked about, that Women in STEAM Innovation, celebrating 250 years of our nation. So with that, we do hope that you apply. Please share it with other schools in your region. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Philippa.
All right. I think that's such an amazing opportunity. I hope you get a ton of applications and I'm sure you'll bring in really interesting people. So I don't see any questions in the chat, any questions or comments. So I'd like to just thank everyone for coming today, and to our panelists for presenting. It was a fabulous session. Let me see one thing. Oh, and people are starting to say thank you. So just really thank you to everyone. And we hope to see you. We have one more session for this series, the third Wednesday of June. And hope to see you all then. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.